Welcome to the Integrated Commissioning Committee for the Borough of Wigan. We have two meetings. This is the open meeting. To just run through the attendees as we speak at this stage, myself, there's Marios Adamo, Alexia Mitten, Kate Ardern, Gemma Bathurst-Whittle, Jennifer Bullen, Stuart Cowley, Craig Harris, Keith Cunliffe, Jane Davis, Ella Bailey, Frank Costello, Jennifer Gamick, Jonathan Kerry, Julie Crossley, Andrew Lee, Linda Scott, Paul McKevitt, David Molyneux, oh hello David, Peter Armour, Paul Prescott, Mark Rotherham, Sally Forshaw, Tim Collins and Jen Wong, who are a mixture of officers and members of this committee. So welcome to everybody. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to today's agenda item? Just to remind you, obviously this is a meeting in public, and so it is being recorded. I think we will be publishing it somewhere. We've had some technical problems why it's not being live streamed, but we'll be publishing it later tonight. So just to bring to your attention of that fact, and Claire, just remind you that the chat function. So if you any declaration of interest, or either raise your hand or declare it through the chat. No. Okay, so are there any apologies? I've just seen a message somewhere. Tim? Or,
just from Colette Dutton, Chair, Director of Children's Services.
That's fine, thank you. And there's one from Brendan Whitworth as well, which Andrew Lee's deputising for. So, okay. So we have the minutes of the previous meeting, which was the meeting of 22nd of September. Are we first of all content they're a true and accurate record?
Yes. Chair, Peter Armour speaking. Frank has pointed out to me that actually my name is missing from the present and I was at that meeting.
All right, thank you. So we can make that addition. Is there any other corrections to make? Okay, so with that addition of Peter's name, we can approve those minutes as being correct, which then takes us on to the actions of that meeting, which are item 4. Obviously, what the phase 3 recovery COVID-19 will come to our January meeting, and the CC performance report is on the agenda subsequently. So we'll be able to close that in a moment or two. So that takes us on to item 5.1, which is the COVID-19 response. There obviously is a report, but as with many of these things, they're out of date within moments of being written. So, Kate, I'm not sure if you want to comment on your report, or maybe comment on what the situation is today, because it may be similar or very different.
I'll comment on a little bit on both, Tim, if I may. What I've done in pulling the presentation together, which really forms the report, is trying to describe our journey to date with COVID-19. But I'm sure, as colleagues will appreciate, it is a very fast-moving and rapidly evolving situation. What I would say is that we have learned a great deal in responding to COVID as a whole society, whole system approach in Wigan. And what I would say is the primary lesson, and something that I think others could learn from, is the approach we've taken, which has been very place-based, very asset-based, and very much in the spirit of the deal. So what we've done is to really pivot the deal from the approach we were taking around health and social care reform and health improvement into a health protection pandemic response. And I think that's very much, Tim, a lesson going forward in terms of our transformation agenda. It also links very much into community wealth building. So you might describe this as the community health building element of that agenda. In terms of where we're up to now with the pandemic, just of today, so I've got today's latest figures. I can, if you just put the next slide up, that's actually quite a helpful slide. It just shows across Greater Manchester the sort of different pattern of the epidemiological journey. And one thing I would say that Wigan has been quite different from the other 9 boroughs is that we've followed a traditional epidemic pathway. So we've had a very steep and high curve, first wave curve in April, and a peak that lasted about 2 weeks in April and started to come down. And then we went right back down to pre-epidemic levels of transmission. So our new infection rates were around 6 per 100,000 population, right the way through June, July, August, up until the second week in September when we started taking off again. Could you put the next slide on? Thank you. And that bit of analysis from Public Health England just shows you, if you look at the Wigan slide at the bottom right, you can see we've behaved very differently. And again, in the second pandemic wave, that is, we've again followed a classic epidemic, high accelerating upward trajectory, peaking for about 2 weeks. But I am very pleased to say now that we appear to be over the peak and on the downward trajectory. And today's new infection rates are down to 441.5. So we've gone from being the second worst in Greater Manchester and at one point 3rd worst in the country, down to the 6th highest. We've had a reduction of 37%, which is quite significant, and that's the highest level of reduction across Greater Manchester. And we're now down to 27th in the national ranking as well. At the same time, our over 60s rates of new infection has also, and that's a very sensitive indicator, has now gone down to 427. So again, we're keeping pace in terms of over 60s reduction. If you want to just quickly flip onto the next slide, that just is a heat map looking across the ages. And again, what we've seen is that transmission going on, predominantly in the working age group. So we've had, particularly in Wigan, women aged 50 to 59 have been the sort of highest number of where our cases of concern have concentrated, but not necessarily translating into admissions or indeed premature mortality. If you go to the next one quickly. And then just a comparison, I think this is a sort of classic comparison. Again, we've tended to mirror the experience of our South Lancs and Merseyside neighbours rather than our GM neighbours. And we've tended to be about 2 to 3 weeks behind. And if you think about how the patterns have reduced in Merseyside, we're coming down now to similar rate to them. So next one, please, quick. Thank you. And that just, again, just shows you the peak and just shows you that we have started to come down. That acceleration is now happening. And that's a combination of the tier 3 restrictions, the fact we've had half term, and now the national lockdown restrictions are starting to have an impact on our new admissions, on our new infection rates. That will clearly not translate directly into impacts on health and social care, at least I think for another week to 10 days. So I think we're still going to be looking at a more fragile situation in terms of health and social care impacts until the full impact of national lockdown kicks in. Next one, please. Again, that's just the age breakdown and sex breakdown. As you can see, we've been relatively successful in keeping it out of our older age group, which I think is tribute to the work that's gone on across all of the system, particularly the deployment of things like care home squads, the work through the SDFs, which has been very much that multi-agency approach to whole system approach through the Healthier Wigan Partnership to responding to COVID. If you go to the next one quickly, just shows the SDFs. We've tended to, again, unlike other boroughs, we've not tended to have very concentrated geographical hotspots. So there have been, in for example, in Oldham. There have been a number of their middle super output areas that have featured in the national watch list. We did briefly have a 5 of ours, but that's come off very quickly. And what we've tended to see is the cases rising across the borough in a very even geographical spread rather than an uneven geographical spread. And that's typical of epidemic transmission. So what we're now seeing, we just keep a watch on Wigan Central, but we think there are some particular issues in Wigan Central that might contribute to it being a little bit higher than other places. But what we're now seeing, Tim, is a cooling down across the borough, which is really helpful. And we'll just keep an eye on whether there are any little pockets that we need to effectively target. If you go to the next one very quickly, again, that just shows the cases by ward. As colleagues will know, we publish a weekly tracker. I've just signed off this week's, which of course shows the data by ward as well. Next one, please. And you can see the impact on admissions. We've had a higher peak of admissions in this second wave. We started off having quite a few admissions in the younger age group, working age adults. And given the developments, both clinical in terms of things like oxygenation, dexamethasone, and the age of the individuals who've been admitted, more of a pressure on general acute beds than ICU, but clearly pressures in ICU as well, but better results in terms of outcomes for patients. Next one, please. Death registration, we have seen obviously sadly some more deaths, but fewer in care homes during the second wave. And again, this has been quite a significant difference in the approach, and indeed, I think we're learning from wave 1. Next one. And carry on again, please. And just the age breakdown. So I'm not going to go through the whole of the slides, just to say that I'll just pick up some key messages and a key learning. Obviously, the focus of our activity now has been through the second wave contact tracing and the development of the locally supported contact tracing system to support the national contact tracing system, but also our own dealing with complex case contact tracing. I have to say our local service is responding magnificently. We've just had an additional 19 new contact tracers come online to support that, and there will be additional demand on contact tracing because of the deployment of locally enhanced testing at scale through the deployment of the new lateral flow tests, which I've just actually come off a teleconference on. So there will be some work across Greater Manchester going on in terms of prioritisation of the deployment of those test kits, but also some local prioritisation as well. And Craig and I will be picking up a conversation about that on Friday, once we've got the recommendations of the mass testing expert group from Greater Manchester. That will obviously cause some additional workload for our local contact tracers, and that's being modelled into both the asks of government, but also our local surge capacity. And I pay tribute to Sonia Halliwell and Leslie O'Halloran, who've been working really well, really closely with my team on sorting out business processes behind that to make sure we have a really solid business system to allow us to surge capacity for both mass testing and also for contact tracing. So those are going to be the two big areas, along with obviously the work we're doing very collaboratively with Craig, with Julie, with Linda and colleagues on the arrangements to start the deployment of a mass vaccination programme for COVID. We're not expecting anything other than very small amounts before Christmas, and the Joint Committee on Vac and IM have already published the national prioritisation list for who receives the vaccine, so very much targeted at care homes, health and social care staff, and of course the over 80s. In other words, people who are the most vulnerable or who are really key workers who we need to get vaccinated first. There won't be any mass vaccination programme for the general public really until the spring, so you're not looking at that, but we have been really dummy running that through our excellent work on the flu vax programme this year, which has got fantastic uptake. And because of the work on that, we now know that should a COVID vaccine be available before Christmas, we won't have any delay in being able to deploy that, because there has to be a gap between giving people flu vax and then giving them COVID. So the fact that we've got really high uptake, particularly in the over 65s already, means that should we be fortunate enough to get some COVID vaccine, we should be able to deploy that very quickly. But we've been already running mass vaccination sessions, so we know how to do that at some scale and pace. So Tim, I'm going to sort of conclude with that, and just to say that I think the way I've sort of written it up is really something that we will put into an outbreak report and review once we get fully the other side of Christmas, because we will need to look back on what's gone well with pandemic response and what we might do differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. That's very helpful. So are there any comments or questions in relation to that? You either put your hand up or just indicate in the chat box. So I've just seen some of that. Linda?
Yes, Tim, just to pick up from what Kate said, although there's an expectation that COVID vaccination might not be available until well after Christmas, primary care has been asked nationally to be ready for the 2nd of December. Our practices and PCNs have been working non-stop since we were informed of that approximately 10 days ago, and we have today submitted the venues that we would like to use to do mass vaccination. I cannot overestimate just the amount of work that the practices will now have to start to do to be in position to start that vaccination programme. It's just to acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's very helpful, thank you. And any other comments? There was a hand, I didn't see who it was, it disappeared as quick as it came. So okay, so I think that's a helpful summary of where we stand as we are. And yes, it will be wise for us to make sure we continue to learn from this pandemic. We're hopeful that there'll be a vaccine preventing a third wave, but we need to learn lessons for any other future pandemic. So yeah, so it'd be helpful to have that report in that coming weeks and months at the time you think is appropriate. So yeah, thank you for that. So if we take us on to item 5.2, which is the integrated the quality subcommittee terms of reference, is Sally on? Yeah, Sally's on. Is there anything you want to add just after we have the terms of reference, just in terms of any context for the committee?
Thank you, Tim. Yes, so these are the new integrated quality terms of reference that better reflect really Wigan's integrated approach and partnership working as referenced in section 1.2 of the document. I'd just like to draw your attention to section 1.3 really, which is now a little bit different from the norm. It highlights the current system challenge as a result of COVID pandemic. However, it does emphasise that we also need to ensure that the safety of our local people and our key workers remain our priority, and that we maximise the potential for learning where any lapses of care, the quality of care and treatment have been identified. As for the remainder of the document, I think the membership remit, responsibilities and reporting arrangements for the committee are clearly stated, and I don't really intend to go through any further detail. Thanks. I just want them to be ratified really by the committee.
That's fine. That's really helpful. Thank you, Sally. So are we happy to approve those? Yes. Yep. Okay. Which then takes us on to item 5.3, which is a similar set of terms of reference from the Finance Performance Subcommittee, again, they're coming here much more for ratification, but is there any particular comment on these?
Yeah, Tim. I'd just like to point out that the terms of reference still report to the governing body, so that does need amending. So I will apologise at the start of that. But other than once those amendments are made, hopefully the rest of the document can be ratified.
Yeah. Okay. So are we happy to approve those? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Mods, thank you. Which that takes us on to item 6.1, which is the Borough Performance Report. That is month 6, just with timelines of reporting. I've got several names against this. I've got sort of Jonathan and Rachel. Is one of you on?
Hi Tim, it's possibly myself and Gemma, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Too many people to have on one screen. I think just to give a bit of an overview to the committee, and then myself and Gemma, I think, will run people through. As you'll recognise the format of the report, we do intend to continue to refresh the report, picking up some of the challenges and comments that have been set to us from the Healthy Wigan Partnership and yourselves in having that single integrated performance report for the borough. But given the redeployment of staff and some of the other priorities, whilst we continue to want to demonstrate the integrated nature of reporting, we're still within that sort of interim period. But we hope that at least pulling out some of these highlights and some of these critical metrics will assist in some of that continued feedback from yourselves to make sure that the future sort of product, as we define it, is meeting the requirements of the committee. I think probably me and Gemma will sort of take sections dependent on sort of background and sort of inclination. The first bit very much focuses on urgent and emergency care, A&E performance, non-elective admissions and ambulance wait times. You'll see from A&E performance quite a nice curve diagram. I think if that was a scientific equation, it would be quite a well-respected one. Definitely demonstrates a return to normal levels of activity. The reduced activity that allowed a closer achievement to that national standard of 4-hour wait. But as we've seen activity levels increase and the additional pressures predominantly on WWL with beds and other issues, that we've seen that performance reducing, but still within what would be expected to be the norm, and actually above that performance from the latter part of last year. Similarly, non-elective admissions, although dipped during the first quarter, have also returned, and I think as much as we'd like to keep our non-elective admissions down, does demonstrate that people are receiving care and accessing care in an appropriate fashion. So I think it's within that realms of normality that we'd expect to see. And the final element on this first page with regards to the ambulance wait times, again, some difficult situations to be handling around category 2, but are very close to target with regards to the emergency response, and category 1 being close to the 7-minute time scale that is that target. I think Gemma will pick up the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I'll just go over it very broadly because I'm conscious of time, but overall the suite of our key social care indicators are looking quite positive. Obviously, as Jonathan said, in his areas, some of these areas we did see not necessarily a decline, but a decline in performance, but a decline in activity, and we felt some of that was obviously the impact of COVID in terms of people referrals coming into the social care system, and that's had a knock-on effect on services that have been offered as a result. We think some of that is a little bit around nervousness of people to actually approach services for help, but also people have been relying a bit more on family members than they would have done during normally during COVID. But we have seen those resume back to normal levels really pre-COVID towards the end of October, but we're now again seeing some similar dips. The other thing to say would probably be, just to pick up, if I'm honest, is we've got obviously our new Better at Home team in place, which is our discharge to assess model, which we've had to stand up in response to COVID, and that's showing quite positive results in terms of we're seeing a lot less people now going into care homes, if you like, as a response, but actually being supported at home. So that's quite a positive sign. Again, we're seeing our increased activity in that area again now as we enter the second wave. Sorry, Jonathan, I'm probably messing up your order a little bit. I'm trying to just do an overarching of all of ours. But if I just jump onto the impact of COVID, I suppose the only other thing to say would be that reablement, we've had pressures in that area just because obviously of the discharge to assess model, but we've managed to pick those up now, and that seems to be back off. It was on Opal 4, but it's back on track a little bit more. And then the only final thing was to say that obviously some of the healthy life expectancy and smoking figures are looking quite positive. And I think that's it from me, in case unless anyone's got any questions. So over to you, Jonathan, to finish your areas if you like.
Thanks, Gemma. I think the only thing for me to pick up before talking about some of the COVID elements is, I think on page 62 of the pack, or page 60, it's highlighted that this is with regards to referral to treatment times and the 6-week or increased waiters. I think a lot of the detail is there within the report, so I'll not sort of read that out. This obviously shows a position as it was at month 6, as Dr. Dalton outlined, where we were starting to see the start of works towards the phase 3 and sort of restart of services, the reduction in waiting times and sort of services sort of picking up activity, and there was definitely some positive signs of that during those initial parts of Q3. I think what we're going to start to see over the next coming months, because of the increase of the second wave and the requirement to focus on sort of acute care within the hospital settings, it is possibly a sort of a continuation of increased waiting times. But I think we've got some of the measurements in place to show what direction we should be heading in, and we will continue to measure against those phase 3. I know that Julie, through her team, will be continuing to support and guide colleagues across WWL and wider providers in making sure that we're ensuring that patients are seen as quickly as possible. And I know that's something that picks up with some of our regular conversations with WWL. The final section for me I thought was worth highlighting. Was just to give you an update on the work within primary care, and predominantly around our digital first approach. This is page 65 of the pack. Just wanted to pull out three diagrams that demonstrate the volume that is happening across primary care in support of COVID, hopefully to maintain activity and support to patients as close to home. Ask My GP being one of our platforms that's used by about 70% of our practices. 75,000 requests are being handled on a monthly basis, and that's quite a consistent number over the last few months, and starting to see how we can utilise that, and practices build on that to support a consistent approach to care. We still remain focused on ensuring we don't have health inequalities through our use of digital. And as you can see from the second diagram on page 65, a real spread across demographics, not just across younger age ranges, but being used by those over 65, but doesn't lose sight of having to have the right mechanisms and access into our general practice to support all patients. And then the final element, just to demonstrate that historically we were seeing 80% of patients face-to-face. It's more like 10 to 15% now, and a large number of patients being supported over telephone calls, via online secure messaging capabilities, and via video consultations, that hopefully supports us definitely into the continuation of this COVID pandemic, but also in building for a stronger future and hopefully more accessible services. I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So have I opened for any comments, observations or questions? So I've got Peter and then Frank.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan and Gemma. Firstly, it's great to see the CCG and the Council reporting alongside one another. That's extremely positive. I've got a two-part question, really. Well, one's a question, one's an observation. The first question is, obviously in an integrated scheme or system, it's not just about primary care, acute care and social care. We've got our old friend in the voluntary sector, the VCFSE as it's known. I'm sure they've been very helpful during COVID. It was a question I was going to ask Kate actually, but I know the VCFSE sector have been extremely helpful in sort of signposting vulnerable people, turning around funding opportunities for people short of food, people who are lonely and so on. So I guess the first question is probably too big a question to answer right now, but something I would like to hear about in the future is how the enlarged organisation, the ICC, is going to engage with the VCFSE sector as part of this, particularly as we move through COVID. The big flavour is going to be about the inequalities in health. In particular in our region, obviously we've got huge inequalities in between north and south, but we've got inequalities within our own regions as well, and that's not. And I think what's happened in the past when we've been looking at inequalities, it's been a question of throwing money at a problem where we put lots of signposts up, and it's not about signposts; it's about good quality data. So that will, I guess, fall on you two good folk and your particular sort of area of responsibility to give us really good quality data where we can start to identify, let's say, somebody with a respiratory problem who is living in bad housing, for instance. And that's where we've got to get to. I'm really struck, I'm sorry to go on about this, but it is a bit of a hobby horse. I'm really struck by the fact that if we're looking at the outcomes and the length of life and the quality of life, only 20% of the contribution towards that is clinical. The other 80% is made up of a number of other factors, sort of lifestyle issues and so on. Yet the clinical consumes the lion's share of the budget, and I've got absolutely no doubt that the funding models in the future are going to be moved to put a lot more emphasis on population health. And I would like to see reports starting to evolve. It's not something you're going to answer tomorrow, but starting to evolve over the coming months and years to show that sort of movement to get into the heart of our populations, to start looking at the inequalities and starting to address those base factors. I'll shut up now because it's a hobby horse of mine.
Okay, I guess the simple answer is going to be yes, but would anyone like to sort of pick up a bit more detailed response to that, Kate or someone? Yep, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm very grateful for your support on that. As you will know, as I'm sure you're an avid looker at my public health annual movies, that we have focused a great deal on inequalities. And I have to say, during the COVID response, the VCSE sector have been absolutely at the heart of the SDF response. So they've been really key to that. As Gemma and Jonathan know, we've been working on this intelligence report. Also is evolving in terms of its look at the population health aspects. So although we're reporting on this at the moment, these particular key indicators, and by the way, our healthy life expectancy is outperforming England. So there is a real good news story in terms of our inequalities agenda. But we have been working, we started working before COVID, but obviously we've had to sort of morph some of this during the COVID response because of team capacity. We have been looking at really ramping up the, if you like, the qualitative experience of our communities and looking at things like participatory research, which then brings in that citizen engagement as part of the deal. So watch this space. This report will evolve.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Frank, then Marios.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was interested in the penultimate slide. And what that shows is COVID deaths within Wigan from February through to October, and likewise all causes deaths. What we don't have is a comparison of all causes deaths and its rate relative to previous years, which causes me to then say, is there a level of excess deaths? And if so, from what cause? And is there some learning within that that would influence our strategy in terms of responding to phase 2 and any future demands upon us? There seems to be a gap there, which we need to understand better, that are there excess deaths? And if so, what are the causes? So we need some knowledge in that case.
Okay, I'll probably bring Kate back, I suspect, on that.
Thank you, Tim. Frank, we actually have done a mortality review as part of our learning from wave 1, and we did it as a whole system. So with colleagues from WWL, we also brought in Matt Hennessy from Public Health England, who is their absolute expert analyst, and Ian Hall from the University of Manchester, who is part of SPI-M. So he's part of the national modelling set of experts who advise SAGE. And looking at our mortality, yes, we've clearly had excess deaths from COVID, but we're not seeing a particular problem in terms of excess mortality overall. So if that hopefully answers your question, we haven't put it on the indicators here, but we can certainly go away and do that for you. We're not seeing anything particular at the moment in terms of the impact on other mortality. So I look at the mortality stuff every single day, because we produce obviously a daily tracker for system leaders as well as the weekly tracker for the public. So we're also now going to, and in fact Tim and I are going to pick up a conversation following our excess death group, because we do obviously look at, we have an excess death group as part of our COVID response. Then what we're going to do is a repeat of that session we did after wave 1, and pick up some learning that colleagues in Salford have been doing, looking at whole system response. So it's part of our ongoing incident review.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. Thanks for that, Kate.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and just as a comment in the chat, that there's obviously also a Healthy Wigan Partnership Alliance activation board at the end of the month about code and health inequalities, just to bring that to attention. Yeah. I think Marius was there. Yep.
Yeah, I was only going to feed Peter's hobby horse and say at some point it might be useful if we have some specific population-based intervention to reduce inequality. Maybe not immediately. We know we're not going to solve the puzzle. It's not solvable, but an injection of something at some point might be a good example for others to follow, especially if it's founded on our partnership strengths. So maybe not for now, but when Peter speaks this, I will be listening and supporting that.
Okay, so again, Wigan is determined to lead in this area, and I'm sure we will continue to develop that at scale as described already. So Peter's hobby horse will be well fed, I hope, because it belongs to many of us. Are there any other questions or comments about this? I mean, certainly, again, I would just personally reflect, absolutely welcome we finally got to a joint report on this. I know we've been trying for a number of months to get to that stage, so it's very welcome we have got across the finish line on that. I think there's some good news stories and there's some areas of challenge for us, and it's helpful that we can pick those up and respond to them. I believe that we'll obviously get further updates of this report. I think, is it quarterly, on a regular basis, put it in those terms, and we look forward to seeing the next of those in due course. Okay, so if we then go on to the finance reports, which is net size 6.2, I think Paul's against this.
Shall I take this one, Paul?
Yeah, go on now.
Okay, sorry. So this is the first joint finance report between the council and the CCG, which I've worked with Mark Rotherham on. There are a couple of caveats around it due to the new regime that's been in place, but we didn't want to hold up and blame COVID. We want to keep the process going, so you could see the kind of format that it would go into. But as you'll see, it is only for 6 months, and it's from a CCG point of view, it's very much based on that command and control part. So we was given a base budget, and then we had the top up process. So it's not an ideal budget at the minute. Following on from that, we've got the spotlight areas that we've mentioned that we put in place. We're going to populate them in the future months. I can confirm that there's meetings going on around the CHC and the long-term care joint patients. So the work's happening there, so we'll be able to feed that into the next reports. And just as a little bit of information, there is £52.5 million over the 2 organisations for CHC and long-term care. So it is a real sizable budget. So I think it's a real area that we need to look at as a system and see, make sure we spend that best for our Wigan patients. You'll see also from the report there's a adverse variance on the local authority element of 4.6. That is very much based on COVID, so that is definitely expected. And then just a little bit about the month 7 to month 12, just to update the committee. There is a GM envelope, which I think we've mentioned previously. Lots of returns have been back and forth to Greater Manchester to make sure we've got the Wigan position highlighted at GM. There is going to be a further return in pre-Christmas, because I think the result that came back to the north of NHS England, I think, was a lot higher than expected. And I think also the view at that point was around looking at recovery and restoring the system, which I think is completely not what's happened at the minute. COVID has come back, so I think we're going to re-look at that and report back to NHS England on that. And then it's just any comments or anything additional you'd like in the report in the future to enhance decision making. I think we did mention if there was ever anything on the agenda that needed that financial decision, we'd make sure we pulled that out in this report, so you'd have a full view and you could see where that sat within the pool to make decisions a little bit more transparent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Are there any? Yeah, so Peter.
Yeah, sorry, it's my voice again. Congratulations, everybody. It's a great start. I guess what I would be looking to see as this evolves over coming months and maybe years is the effect of the financial plus the operational. The whole reason we're working together and integrating is that we want to have more for less, or at least more for the same. And I would like to see those expressions, either financial or operational, that actually tell us where 2 plus 2 is making 5. I'm not sure where they are at the moment, but I think it's something we need to bear in mind and work on, because we have to be able to show the evidence of our integration and the success of our integration. So that's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, fine. That's fair points. Are there any other comments? There's lots of the chat's gone on fire. Okay, so I think we can clearly receive that, and again appreciate and note the welcome that integrated finance report in the same way as we did for the performance one, which takes us on to the quality reports, which has got Sally's name against it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the Q2 quality report that covers the period from the 1st of July to 30th of September this year. The report provides governing body and ICC committee with an overview on the key quality activities and initiatives that have been undertaken mainly by the CCG quality team in this time period. As you will be aware, we just referenced the integrated quality committee terms of reference at the beginning of the meeting, and therefore joint reports will be forthcoming subsequently. So this report covers really a wide range of areas ranging across the different healthcare settings, and it does include the CQC targeted and focused inspections that have been undertaken in several of our care homes within the borough. The report also notes that at the end of June, sequence schemes, and for anyone that's unsure of that acronym, they're clinical quality initiatives, they were suspended nationally for the remainder of this year due to the system pressures as a result of the pandemic. It is anticipated that these will recommence from April next year, but we'll need to watch this space. It does also document the extensive work that the CCG's medicines management team, quality team and primary care teams undertook to support our general practices for this year's flu campaign. And I know we've talked at length about that already this afternoon. Those large venue sites across the borough that we use for the flu vaccination, we believe that will have proved really valuable exercise in preparing for the forthcoming COVID vaccinations, as Linda mentioned earlier. Happy to take any questions about this report.
Okay, thank you for that, Sally. And again, welcoming that flag that this is the last of this style, and we'll move to that new way of reporting next time. So any questions or comments? Is that Craig and then Jane?
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair. I think it's just worth noting that, as you can see today, there's a lot of continuation towards our Team Wigan integration agenda, despite being, in a global pandemic and a level 4 incident management arrangement with NHS England, and now going into wave 2 and just about to come hopefully out of the peak of wave 2, we've continued to do a significant amount of our business despite many things being either paused or put on hold. And I just think it's worth noting, that Sally and the team, Paul and the team, Jonathan and the team, and all the work Kate described, it's a phenomenal amount of work that gives us a really great picture. And if I just, for 1 second, fast forward 6 months to hopefully a place when when the dust is settling a bit, I actually think it will be great intelligence to help shape our next stage of our journey. And I don't see this happening in lots of places elsewhere. So I think there's just something about a tiny pat on the back for all of the officers who have worked extremely hard, long hours, who are, not getting the opportunity to get up from the desk and drive home and have a bit of peace, and are stuck behind the desk at home or at the kitchen table. I think it's just worth noting that it's challenging times, but looking at the agenda today and the work, it's been a phenomenal amount in addition to responding to COVID. And that goes for all of our clinicians as well, of course. It's not just the officers in the CCG or the council. I'm generally when I talk about Team Wigan, including, our GPs, staff in WWL, our social workers, all Kate's health protection team, etc.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely endorse that, and would agree on behalf of on our collective behalves to endorse that message. Sorry, am I? So Jane, then Frank.
Yeah, it was just really to comment in relation to the mass flu programme, and the fact that actually it was a complete sort of team effort, down from the reception staff in the practice that had to book the patients in. I work with Jonathan and his team in terms of using new IT and software to get it up and running. Our nursing staff who had to work in a very different way to what they weren't used to, and they embraced the change. But also recognising that quality of the service and care that was given is actually endorsed by our patients as well. And we had very positive feedback from patients who attended the mass flu clinic vaccination sites, and were very positive about the change and the fact it was delivered in a safe, good quality way.
That's really good news and pleasing to hear. Frank, has Jane possibly stolen your thunder?
Right, thanks, Chair. Craig in part has stolen my thunder. I just wanted to comment on the report itself and its comprehensive nature and the assurance it provides to us that we are very much concerned with delivering quality of provision. And when I contrast what we see now with perhaps the position 5 or 6 years ago, we're at a totally different level than we were, and we can take some assurance from that. And Sally's report goes into considerable detail, but does so because it's essential in providing that assurance. So well done, Sally and the team, because we do know that where there are issues, then they're certainly being addressed.
Yeah, no, again, echo that. So no more comments. I think so I'll summarise that saying we absolutely welcome this report, welcome the tremendous hard work done by so many across so many organisations and part of our borough's health and care system. We'll absolutely welcome that ambition to do this in that integrated way going forward. So thank you for that update, and we'll look forward to that next report. Which that takes us on to item 6.4, which is, what's that? That's the safeguarding report for Q2. Again, I think it's Sally again.
Yeah, so that's me again. Thank you, Chair. This report is intended really to provide the committee with a comprehensive overview of the breadth of work completed again by the safeguarding team during the period 1st of July to 30th of September. It provides an overview of the CCG's governance arrangements in relation to safeguarding agenda. It does also reflect the COVID-19 pandemic as its unprecedented challenge, throughout which the safeguarding team have continued to work with our NHS providers and multi-agency partners to ensure statutory processes are fulfilled, and that vulnerable children and young people and adults remain a priority. I think it's fair to say that the capacity of the team continues to be challenged by the volume of work, particularly in relation to serious case reviews, serious adult reviews and domestic homicide reviews. However, we do have some good news, and that is that we appointed a designated clinical officer for special educational needs and disabilities, and she started working with us last week. Her role is to ensure that we are fully compliant with the legislation and spirit of the SEND Code of Practice and improve the outcomes for these children and young people. So on that very positive note, I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you. So again, opening that up, are there any comments or questions? At the risk of startling the horses, it is an ambition to, as this oversighted by that same quality committee, to further integrate this agenda, recognising that I know there are a number of statutory reporting duties we need to be mindful of. However, in line with our ambition to integrate, is that something we will be developing in the coming months?
Absolutely. I know Craig is wanting to come in and respond to that, I think, as well, Tim, but just to say that we do have a tripartite safeguarding arrangement already in train. Yes, absolutely, that will be the intention for future reporting.
Yeah, Craig.
Yes, just very quickly, Chair. I know that if Councillor Bullen's still on, there was a few of us who attended the first deal board for children today, that's going to look at the improvement journey across children's social care, but also a range of pathways for our children. I made the comment that in relation to the partnership groups, that the ICC should be one of the reporting routes, especially in relation to commissioning and placements of children's, not just high cost placements, but general market management, and that was supported. So I think there will be definitely from the children's agenda an interface to that new deal board for children. In addition, I've had a very brief conversation with Stuart Cowley, the Director of Adult Social Care, just with regards to how we may mirror some of the improvement work and work that we want to do to advance the adults agenda. So Stuart has asked that some of his team get involved, and I've committed, and I've not had a chance to speak to Sally yet because it was literally 10 minutes before the meeting, that we would continue to do some of this work together, which I know Sally's already been absolutely committed to anyway. And just finally, Alison and myself and the police met under our what they call multi-agency safeguarding arrangements, and we were continuing with those arrangements that provide chief executive oversight and assurance to the whole process. So I think definitely two distinct pieces of work for adults and children safeguarding, but obviously still wanting to keep our family approach, as that is absolutely the heart of the deal. So I don't know if Councillor Bullen wants to make a comment, because I thought I had to leave the deal board for children early, but it was a really helpful board for the first hour that I was there.
Okay, so I'm going to bring in Jenny, then Keith afterwards. So Jenny.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Just to follow up on Craig's comments, we did have a very optimistic and forward-looking first meeting of our Wigan deal for children and young people, which has set us up well on our improvement journey. Of course, there are considerable pressures. There were pressures in our children's services before COVID. And then the COVID situation has just served to exacerbate those for all the reasons that we all know well, with pressures within family, an increased need for safeguarding, child protection, and indeed in care services for our children and young people. So it is considerable pressure. It's pressure on resources as well, but all this is being discussed. We've had a new Director of Children's Services, Colette Dutton, come in just in the summer, and she's already set us up well on this improvement journey. And a recent Ofsted focus visit, yes, they did come in the middle of COVID. They did a 2-day visit. They've given us improvement points, which are very helpful, because actually they've acknowledged our own self-evaluation about what we needed to do and the journey that we were on. So with support of partners today, as I say, it was a very optimistic and forward-looking meeting, a real will for collaboration from partners for us to work together and get it even better for our children and young people, because we do very much put them at the heart of our service. So thanks, Chair, unless anybody has any questions.
I think that's really helpful. So maybe bring Keith in. I suspect we'll get Keith, over to yourself.
Thanks, Tim. I mean, I do have some concerns about our safeguarding at the moment. I mean, I think I clearly want to see us have a life course approach and deal with whole life situations, but I'm just conscious of the improvement plan for children and the amount of work that will involve, and the opportunity for us to improve adult safeguarding at the same time. And there is, I mean, it's not for this meeting, but there is a meeting tomorrow of the Safeguarding Leadership Group, the Wigan Safeguarding Leadership Group, and I think I'll be having some discussions there about proposals for moving forward, whilst not losing our focus on whole life situation, but actually just helping us through the next year or two in a different way. So, you know, it's just to say that there's a lot to do on adults. There's an awful lot to do on children's in terms of the improvement plan and the deal for children that Jenny and Craig were talking about. So I do think we need to really look at what the capacity is and what the abilities are within the teams to be able to bring about those improvements.
Okay, that's really helpful. Just looking at chat. Okay, yeah. So I think as regards to the report, absolutely, I think I'm hearing acceptance and welcoming of that report, but I think in those broader strategic contexts to bring together the two strengths of the two teams into that way of doing described, accepting the challenges that then does bring with where we find ourselves, but there's obviously a clear commitment there to integrate and to bring that forward as we just described. So thank you. That takes us on to item 7, which is update from GM Partnership and Committees, which notion has Craig's name against it. Is there any specific update for this open section, Craig?
So this is a timing issue, as you know, Tim. We had a JCB executive yesterday, so there isn't any papers today. However, I would like to reserve a short conversation in the private part partly because it's a proposed plan, so there's no paper. I want to get support from ICC for the plan with a potential extraordinary meeting next week, but also to get some feedback from other members of JCB, including yourself and Councillor Cunliffe. So I think if we can defer that, it's in the private section. It's probably better done there, as it's not yet. We haven't got any yet public minutes for that meeting yesterday.
Okay, that's probably prudent advice. So that takes us through to portfolio holder decisions, which I'm not aware of any. And then no item for information today, item 9. I'm not aware of item 10, any other business. Sorry for galloping through those. So, okay, so I remind us that the next meeting scheduled is the 16th of December, although there may be an extraordinary conversation subject to what happens in the closed section. And that'll be at 1:30, and that would then bring an end to the open section of the Integrated Commissioning Committee.